I'm reading today is a piece from that famous speech of Martin Luther King Jr. And in rereading it, I just want to remind you that that was in the 60s, and times have changed and language has changed. So just be aware of that. Oops. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is the faith with which I return. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with a new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountain side, let freedom ring." And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous peaks of California. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. When we let freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and hamlet, from every state and city, we will be able to speed up the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, "Free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last." When I was thinking about preparing this sermon after I was invited to speak here, I asked if anything special had been done for the July 4th holiday, and I was told no. So this is one of my favorite topics anyway, and so I thought, I'm going to talk to you about democracy today. I feel it's timely even a few weeks after the 4th, and I feel it's really, really important in this time in our history. So, the young man huddled into his coat and jerked the collar up around his neck against the blustery wind as he hurried across the Diag and up the steps of the Harvard Divinity School. It was a typical winter day there, cloudy and cold, but not raining or snowing yet. Inside, the warmth hit him as he took the steps to the second floor, 2 at a time. Down the hall was Professor Adams' office, his destination. Chris slid into a comfortable seat in the connecting room to Adams' office, where he could glimpse the desk piled high with a jumble of papers and books spilling onto the floor, and the one straight chair. This room, though, lined with bookcases full of weighty tomes on theology and social movements, was cozy, with a carpet on the floor and several upholstered armchairs gathered in a circle. Even though the grate was cold, no fires are allowed in those old buildings anymore. The other 3 chairs were all occupied, waiting for him to take the last one. Professor Adams, or JLA, as he was fondly called, was already sitting there, occasionally puffing languidly on his pipe. The pleasant aroma filled the small room. JLA began the tutoring session, as they do at Oxford, using the ancient Greek Socratic method of questions and answers. He briefly framed the day's topic and then began to ask them open-ended questions designed to challenge their previous preconceptions and cherished opinions and to open new avenues of thought, provoking. It was, as usual, a lively session full of ideas flying back and forth, sometimes directly challenging one another's statements. Adams interspersed the dialogue with a wealth of his famous witty stories and quips. Around campus, he was well known as a great raconteur. Sometimes these 4 students and others were invited to join Adams for summer afternoon sessions on the patio of his Cambridge home. Those were very coveted invitations. The food alone was worth it. Graduate students are always hungry. At the end of the afternoon hours, Adams made this prediction to his students. When you're my age, you'll be fighting American fascists. Later, Chris Hedges, the avid theology student of Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams, became a well-known war correspondent for the New York Times. His first book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, is often mistakenly assumed to be a paean to war. In fact, it is the opposite, showing us not only how war may be deeply bonding, bloody, enthralling, enlivening, and exciting, but it is also a deadly, bloody, and gruesome endeavor. And more cynically, an old man's game played at the expense of young people, sold a bill of goods, enticed by dreams of glory, duty, patriotism, and blessed by God. Hedges admits the pull of feeling more alive than you ever will be in most other circumstances, the thrill of being like a brother to your comrades who might die standing right by you in the heat of battle, knowing your life depends on the whim of fate. He says that in war, all governments lie to you. There are no weapons of mass destruction. There was no yellow cake uranium. You are not fighting for God and country, but for power and money, oil, gas, a toehold over another country. When Chris gave up being a foreign correspondent, he turned to writing. He clearly still wrestles with some of the ideas about the ultimate questions that were posed that day in the little anteroom at HDS. The latest book I read of his was American Fascists, published in 2007. In it, he describes in detail what an important influence Adams, our Unitarian theologian, was on his life. The opening pages of the book contain a 14-point guide to recognizing fascism, as described by the Italian philosopher semanticist Umberto Eco in a 1995 article for the New York Times. Eco was born and grew up in Italy under Mussolini. See if any of these 14 points sound eerily familiar to you. Number 1, cult of tradition. Everything was better at the dawn of human civilization or some golden age in the past. There can be no advancement of learning. Make America great again. When did it go bad? Just exactly what time do you have in mind? When we interred the Japanese American citizens in concentration camps in the desert? When we owned slaves? When we decimated the native population? Number 2, traditionalism implies the rejection of modernism. You have to reject technical advances and scientific information. Quote, global climate change is a hoax invented by the Chinese, unquote. Number 3, irrationalism depends on the cult of action for action's sake. Thinking is a form of emasculation. Therefore, feminization is a horror to be avoided at all costs. Distrust of the intellectual world. Intellectuals are attacked for betraying traditional values. Number 4, the critical spirit makes distinctions, and to distinguish is a sign of modernism. In the modern world, our current world, the scientific community praises disagreement as a way to prove knowledge. For fascism, disagreement is treason. 5, disagreement is a sign of diversity. Fascism grows up and seeks consensus by exploiting and exacerbating the natural fear of difference. The first appeal of fascists is against intruders. Thus, fascism is racist by definition. Quote, deport all immigrants, build a wall, send 4 congressmen who dare criticize back where they came from, love it or leave it, unquote. Number 6, and very important. Fascism derives from individual or social frustration. One of the most typical features of historical fascism is the appeal to a frustrated middle class, a class suffering from an economic crisis or feelings of political humiliation and frightened of pressure from lower social groups. Number 7, to people who feel deprived of a clear social identity, fascism says that their only privilege is the most common one, to be born in the same country. This is the origin of nationalism. The only ones who can provide an identity are its enemies. Thus, at the root of fascism is the obsession with a plot, possibly an international one. The followers must feel besieged. The easiest way to do this is by xenophobia. But the plot must also come from the inside. Jews are usually the best target because they have the advantage of being at the same time inside and outside. And currently, in our country, immigrants serve the same purpose. They are both inside and clamoring to get in. Number 8, the followers must feel humiliated by the ostentatious wealth and force of their enemies. Fascism must also be convinced they can overwhelm their enemies. Thus, the rhetoric can often portray these others as too weak or too strong. Fascist governments are condemned to lose wars because they are incapable of objectively evaluating the force of the enemy. China, they've been beating us for years. NATO's members never pay their fair share. 9, for fascism, there is no struggle for life, but rather life itself is lived for struggle. Thus, pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. It is bad because fascists believe life is permanent warfare. This brings about an Armageddon complex. Since enemies have to be defeated, there must be a final battle, after which comes a golden age where the ideology rules the world. But this contradicts the idea of permanent war. No fascist leader has ever succeeded in solving this predicament. Number 10, elitism is a typical aspect of any reactionary ideology, insofar as it is fundamentally aristocratic, and aristocratic and militaristic elitism cruelly implies contempt for the weak. Fascism can only advocate a popular elitism. Every citizen belongs to the best people in the world. The members of the party are the best among the citizens, and every citizen should be a member of the party. But there cannot be patricians without plebeians. In fact, the leader, knowing that his power was not delegated to him democratically, but was conquered by force, also knows this force is based on the weakness of the masses. They are so weak as to need and deserve a ruler. Number 11. In such a perspective, everybody is educated to become a hero. In every other mythology, the hero is an exceptional being. But fascism treats it as the norm. This cult of heroism is directly and strictly limited to the cult of death. The fascist hero craves death, advertised as the best reward for a heroic life. The fascist hero is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people to death. I like heroes who weren't captured. Number 12, since war and death are both difficult games to play, the fascist transfers his will to power to sexual matters. This is the origin of machismo, which both implies disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality. Since even sex is a difficult game to play, the fascist hero tends to play with weapons. Doing so becomes an ersatz phallic exercise. Huge military displays. Number 13, fascism is based upon a selective populism, a qualitative populism. In a democracy, people have individual rights, but there is a quantitative point of view as well. In fascism, individuals have no rights, and the people is conceived as a quality, a monolithic entity expressing the common will, in caps. Since no large quantity of human beings can have a common will, The leader pretends to be their interpreter. Only I can solve it. 14. Having lost their power of delegation, citizens do not act. There is in our future a TV or internet populism in which the emotional response of a selected group of citizens can be presented to us as the voice of the people, again in caps. Because of this, fascism speaks of rotten parliamentary government. Whenever a politician casts doubt on the legitimacy of an elected government because it no longer represents the voice of the people, we can smell fascism, the deep state. And one more. Fascists speak Orwellian newspeak. The Orwellian book, 1984. They promote an impoverished vocabulary and an elementary syntax in order to limit the instruments for complex and critical reasoning. We must learn to recognize this and other forms of newspeak, even if they take the apparently innocent form of a popular talk show. Alternative facts, fake news, build that wall. Good people on both sides. I'm very hesitant to invoke the name of Hitler because I think that name has been thrown around so often to demean even the smallest infraction someone commits. Fascism is not Nazism. Think more Mussolini, whom Trump has retweeted. Umberto Eco said, quote, "It would be so much easier for us if there appeared on the world scene somebody saying, 'I want to reopen Auschwitz. I want the black shirts to parade again in Italian squares,'" unquote. Life is not that simple. Fascism can come back under the most innocent of disguises. Our duty is to uncover it and to point our finger at any of its new instances every day in every part of the world. The emperor has no clothes. James Luther Adams is very important to us in this study of democracy. He went to Germany in the early 30s to study theology. It was the place. And to observe an evolving movement in the Lutheran Church. The Lutheran Church in Germany was a national church, and that means that every German paid a portion of their taxes to that church, no matter if they attended that church or any church. Many German leaders, clergy and lay, were concerned and disturbed that the Lutheran Church did not speak out strongly enough against the excesses of Hitler and the Nazi party as it was rising to power. Notable among these clergy was Pastor Martin Niemöller, who famously said, quote, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak up because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me," unquote. Another leader was Reverend Dr. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who voluntarily returned from the United States and personal safety here to participate in the resistance to Hitler. He was part of a plot to assassinate Hitler. Both clergymen, Niemöller and Bonhoeffer, were executed after long terms of imprisonment in concentration camps in Germany. Bonhoeffer only 2 weeks before the end of the war. He's a hero of mine because he studied theology, quote, because he didn't believe in God. Doesn't he sound great? Anyway, Adams watched all this happening, and he started to help those who broke away from the National Lutheran Church to a group that was called the Confessing Church. And they worked hard to inform and lead their people to resist the rise of tyranny and atrocity. Well, the Nazis, of course, got really angry and urged Adams to go home. So he did. It left a searing, lifelong impression on his theology and his person. JLA often spoke to his students about the dangers of fascism. Hedges remembers Adams' prediction, quote, "When you're my age," 70s at the time, "you'll be fighting American fascists," unquote. I believe this prediction is dangerously close to coming true in our day. So does Hedges himself. And I just want to point out that Christopher Hedges has been marginalized by the corporate power structure. He's not printed. He's not given talks. It's hard for him to get his books printed. It's a really good example. So what do you think the topic in that theology classroom might have been that Adams threw out to that group of students in his office that winter day? What might it have been? Could it have been something about the value and importance of protecting democracy? Could he have asked them if they saw a creeping fascism abroad in politics? When you became a member of this church, this congregation, and/or the Unitarian Universalist movement, you probably studied our 7 principles and 6 sources of meaning. I hope so. Now, we don't require people to sign on to any of them or all of them, but most of us do hold them quite dear. So if we believe in our democratic process, as our 5th principle states, I think we're in trouble. Not only in society at large, but in our association and our congregations. Our constant care and attention to democracy is lacking. When we have an uncontested election, we are removing choice from people. When we don't bother to run for office, we are abdicating our responsibility to protect democracy. I know when you get asked to run for the board or the search committee, you may be reluctant because you're busy or feeling overwhelmed with your job, your kids, parents, whatever. Or you may already be on a committee. Churches are good at committees. Or you don't feel qualified. So people run unopposed. At the UUA level, the only position that is usually contested is that of the presidency, or maybe the moderator. Everything else is run unopposed. If you want to be the most powerful person in this church, get on the nominating committee. Since most of our elections are by acclamation. In my church last time, the nominating committee called 11 people out of over 100 members. for 5 positions on the board and the endowment committee. 11 people were asked. And only 5 agreed to run for 5 positions. And you know, the nominating committee first calls people they know, if not their friends, pretty close to it. This is no different than when we try to get out of jury duty or fail to volunteer for the planning commission of our local town or some other public function. It's also when we won't agree to run for the county dog catcher or something equally as important but seemingly lowly. The school board, the road or zoning commission. This is how nearly everyone in the United States got gerrymandered when we were all asleep at the switch. Voting in a presidential election is probably, usually, the least important thing we can do to preserve democracy. It's all about being local. It doesn't trickle down. It boils up. That's what happened in the first progressive movement in 1870 to 1920, when we got everything from the Boy Scouts to public libraries, the ACLU, unions, child labor laws, the 40-hour work week. It all came from the bottom up. John Adams, Unitarian and our second president, said, quote, "Remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide," unquote. It behooves us all to work to prove him wrong. I've been encouraged by the outpouring of efforts since the 2016 election to protect our democratic values, ideals, and institutions. New groups have sprung up all across the spectrum, Indivisible, Move On. Older groups like the ACLU, Common Cause, Planned Parenthood, and People for the American Way have been overwhelmed with new memberships and contributions. But we have to keep at it. We can't slack off. We have to focus and maintain our attention. Today, I call for us UUs to take note and do something. Everyone's voice and small part is important. When the nominating committee calls you, seriously consider answering yes to the call. Volunteer. Most committees are always looking for new members. Be especially concerned when you notice there's not much diversity on a team. It's all one gender or age or interest group. Take note and take action to change that. Nominate someone you think will be good for the job. Start to be a group of people who say yes instead of no. Answer the call. If we sleep, others more zealous with their personal agenda will be there to fill the vacuum. We've seen it happen. Poet William Butler Yeats wrote, quote, "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity," unquote. Democracy. Probably the greatest gift of this country's founders. It's our right. It's our religious tradition. It's our sacred trust to keep democracy alive in our congregations and in our society. These are dangerous and challenging times. We need everyone to be alive and engaged. Woke. To carve some time out of your busy schedules to make something good happen, to be engaged over the long haul. We need to be here to support each other in this work. Take someone's place when they have to drop out to renew themselves. If we don't do this, we may, as John Adams claimed, help democracy commit suicide. Or, as our own James Luther Adams predicted, we may suffer under a fascist dictatorship. Most of us have not known that kind of horrible suffering. And make no mistake, it will be terrible. May that not be so. Let us pick up the Olympic torch of democracy and run with it. Pass it on. Keep on keeping on. Refuse to be silenced. Still, she persisted. Focus. Keep our eyes on the prize. Don't be distracted by the latest pseudo-scandal. Ignore the tweets and watch what they do. Pack the courts, refuse to legislate, appoint cronies, incompetent cronies, and people intent on destroying our governments, ignoring the threat to election hacking. Keep on keeping on. May that be so. Amen. Ashe, and blessed be.